pitch on exemplary evidence. Top 10 ways to prove your point. In academic writing, which is what we are learning to do, it's just like in a courtroom. You can't just say stuff, you have to back it up with evidence. Some of the evidence comes from the readings that you're given in the class, but so often, in fact, really, if you're an advanced student, always, you need to go outside the assigned readings and come in with your own material. Of course, especially when you have a research paper, because then it is required. And much of the writing you're doing in this class requires additional research. I have a cute little pun here for those of you that like automobiles. In a car, if you rev up the engine, you get something called RPMs, and my pun is that in revved up academic writing, when you're really driving your academic writing like a race car driver, you're going to have very high references per minute. So I'm trying to get your RPMs up because that makes you sound like a much more advanced student. And of course that means quoting from the text, but quoting from almost anybody else. My mama once said, you better shop around. Here's a quote from an encyclopedia. Here's a quote from an article. Here's a quote from a newspaper. Here's a quote from a website. So you've got to be able to basically snow people with your instant expertise to show that you really know what you're talking about. Statistics, I know many of you think you don't like statistics. Most of you are lying. For things that you love, like let's say cars, you know every statistic on every car that it was ever built or manufactured, or especially your own car. You love shopping, you love fashion, you love technology. You're great with stats on the stuff that you love. Well, guess what? Professors love stats. So even if you don't love them, you need to come up with them. And that's a different kind of evidence. So in addition to quotes, you need to be pushing yourself to come up with statistics. You will notice that in all the readings that are assigned for this class, which are college level readings, there are stats all over the place. And of course facts, or sometimes I say factoids. These are verifiable events or ideas that help support your argument. So you're giving examples from the real world to back up and buttress your argument. Again, if you think like a lawyer, you're in a courtroom, you're trying to prove something, all of these things really matter there too. They matter anywhere in a science report, but they also matter in framing an academic argument. Now you can have little stories and examples. Of course, anecdotal evidence, as it's called, is not 100% reliable, but it's very persuasive. So even when your stories aren't true, they need to be true to life. And any lawyer will tell you, any advanced argumentation teacher will tell you that framing narratives is completely essential for what you're doing. Definitions really matter, and I would urge you not to do the middle school, high school thing, which is to say according to dictionary.com, but to look up instantly enough on your little devices a more expert source. So if you could look up the Encyclopedia of Psychology definition of confirmation bias instead of dictionary.com, and it wouldn't take you any longer, and it looks so much more impressive. Sixth senses details, by which I mean tasty little sensory tidbits, the way things look, sound, taste, feel, smell, or the feeling you get in your heart. These really do matter, and they are a kind of evidence. Now, obviously, in academic writing, you can't overdo this. In some forms of academic writing, you can't use sensory details and personal experience. But in many forms of academic writing, it's absolutely essential. And once again, I think if you look in the books that we're reading, which are college-level texts, which do make world-class arguments and are bestsellers and etc., the authors do this all the time. So as long as it's okay, and it's certainly okay in the assignments you're writing for me, that's something you should think about. Surveys and polls, essential also. It's a kind of statistic, of course, but I think it can be very persuasive. Once again, you see this in all the writings that we're doing. Historical background does not come naturally to most students, but it's essential for many arguments, and knowing your history, knowing the background, knowing the date lines can really make a difference. Of course, breaking things down. Critical thinking is often analysis. Break it down for me, break it down for me. That's what we say on the street. That's also what we say in college classes. So break it down into its small parts. We stole that word from chemical analysis, and it also applies to ideas. All right, now, in terms of how to generate all this information, Scott, where do I get these quotes and stats and anecdotes and definitions? Well, the answer is use the internet. And here's just, the main sources. Obviously, these change all the time. Obviously, there are far more sophisticated sources that you could be using, but here's just the basics. And I'm always amazed how millennials and information generation natives, digital natives, you don't use your tools. Use your tools. Use Google. I'm teaching climate change all the time. You want to know something about fashion and climate change? Google fashion climate change. You want to know something about I don't know, music and climate change. Google music climate change. It's the old reliable, but it works. And of course, you get tons of junk and tons of fake news when you use Google, but you also get useful information. You're a millennial, sort through this stuff. I mean, seriously. YouTube, an amazing resource for many, many things. So many of you are so visual. If you look stuff up on YouTube, it'll teach it to you better in a visual format. You can quote from it also. Once again, of course, there's junky stuff on YouTube, but there's also fantastic stuff. Brainy Quotes is a quotation engine that will instantly give you hundreds of quotes on any subject you want to look up. The Foothill Library does have databases online, and they are fantastic. And they're free, and the Foothill Library pays for them. Wikipedia, I know some of your professors say don't use Wikipedia. My little hint is don't use Wikipedia as your main resource, or certainly your only resource, but do use Wikipedia, especially for things that you're not an expert in. And hint, 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 of course, as most students know, there's a reference sources list at the bottom of Wikipedia that's got 30, 40, 50 sources that are not Wikipedia that the Wikipedia article is based on. Of course, there are thousands, tens of thousands of newspapers and magazines online now. There are online interviews and podcasts. There's there's blogs that you can source by Google by looking at blogs.google.com. And let me just end with this one. Scholar.google.com sorts out and filters out the non-academic, non-super academic egghead sources that people like me, people like professors rely on. So if you're worried that you're getting too much junk, with google.com, use scholars.google.com. Anyway, I hope that inspires you to get out there on the internet. Your ability to become an instant expert is greater than any generation in the entire history of humanity. So use your superpowers to write super papers.